right, we're going to practice some handwriting. So first of all, let's do our L's. L's are a good first loop letter. When we're doing any loop letter, we start on the runway. We glide up to the skyline for the L and come back, and we land smoothly with the tail. So it takes a while to land to slow down. So in doing the L, or the E is very similar. Land, give it a tail, okay? The H, loops up, it comes back, and it crashes. Then we trace back up, make a hump, come back down before we make our tail and land. The F, similar to the H, loops up, and this time instead of crashing, goes straight down, curls around at the line to make its tail. The K, again, is like the H, but crashes. This time, traces back up, makes a small little body, slides down to make the tail. The hardest loop letter for most people is the B. The B loops around like the L and the E. To land, this time curves back up to make kind of a tummy and then a bridge to the line because it will connect at the midline. And those are our loop letters. All right, we're back. Now I'm going to show you our up and down letters. Up and down letters don't loop. They go up to a point and slide back down. Still need that tail before we connect. To make an I, we're going to glide up and we're going to slide down to make a J. Now this time it dives straight down and loops back to make that tail. A P is also an up and down letter. Glide up to that midline, dive down, trace right back up to make that body and make that tail. An S is an up and down letter too. An S goes up to the midline, now drops straight down without the loop to make that tummy and make a tail. Similar to the I though, the T is an easy one to do. This time we're going to go all the way up to the skyline, trace back down to make a tail, but instead of dotting, we're going to cross at the midline. Now a hard one for up and down is a bridge, like the B. The R is a harder one. It goes up to that midline, makes a bridge, and it can connect back to the midline or drop below to make its tail. And those are the first up and down letters. Let me show you two more. Two more up and down letters would be U and W. U comes up, slides down to make like an upside down hump, and then comes back and slides down. So it's almost like you're making two I's, but you don't dot them. That would be a U. W is very similar. Start on that runway, go up to that midline, go right back down to make one hump. Now we make two humps. It's called W for that reason. This time it bridges at the top to connect. Those are up and down letters. Okay, now for my favorite 2 o'clock letters. 2 o'clock letters start with a clock. If I were going to draw a clock here and the hand pointed to 2 o'clock, it would point right about there. And that's where it gets that start. So, like all the other cursive letters, we start on that runway and we're going up. Now we're gliding up to that midline, but this time we're going all the way around to 2 o'clock and tracing back around to make the tail for a C. A lot of things be made by 2 o'clocks. A C, an A with a straight line up, coming back and making a tail, a D, but now we go up higher than the A. We come back down, trace back down to make a tail, and a G, 2 o'clock. This time we go up like the A, we drop down below, loop around to make that tail. Now, like the others, there is one that has a midline connection. That would be the O. The O starts like the C, comes all the way around up to the top point, and then has a bridge to make the midline connection. There's one more 2 o'clock. The Q. The Q starts our 2 o'clock C, do our line just like the G, but this time instead of going to a forward loop, going back to make that loop in the back and makes a tail. But the Q will always be joined with the U, so it's good to practice with the U. And now those are our 2 o'clock letters. Now the last letters I usually teach are hump letters. Hump letters start with a hump, or they have a hump. They, again, like all the rest, start on the lower line, glide up to that midline, you make a small hump. For an N, that hump is the intro hump, and here is another hump. It doesn't have to be bigger, but an N always has two humps in cursive. The reason I show you that it can be bigger is if I erase this, you might recognize a lowercase n, like many of cursive letters. Okay, so I'm going to put that hump back. An M is very similar. We're going to start with one hump, two humps, three humps. We get used to humps. Now, the other hump letters don't have continuous humps, but they start with a hump. A V starts with a hump, and that separates it from a U. Also, it is a midline connector. The Y starts with a hump, but it crosses at the lower line. The Z also starts with a kind of as a hump, goes one hump, two hump, and crosses. And lastly, the X, which I don't have room for here. It's a hump. And after you finish writing what you're writing, you come back and cross it that way. So the X might join an E and go right into maybe another E, an R, and a T to say exert, and we cross it at the end. If you notice, the hump letters aren't as popular letters in writing So N and M are usually taught first. Now, one way I like to teach these, I don't teach each letter, each group at one time. I start with some of the easier ones like the loop letters, the L and the E, and they can be written in continuous, either by alternating or by just doing this motion. This motion is a very good warm up for students as they're learning, either at the L or the midline level with the E. Next, I usually start with another vowel, the I, and I explain that this is now an up-down letter. There's no loop involved. And joining that can be the T because it's also an up-down, and they already know how to do skyline. So those are easy up-down letters to join. And another popular one would be the P because it dives down with it. And this reinforces the up, down, and the straight lines. Popular to early spelling is also the F and the loop letters and the S. Drop down to make its body and the tail. So you can see how you can add these very quickly to get the student spelling some simple words. 2 o'clocks are a lot harder to teach. I like to start with demonstrating the clock and what that means, and then spacing it out in an even space for the student to practice just doing that 2 o'clock method. Usually only 4 or 5 times is enough in a line. So then the student can come along and practice tracing, and it can be, this is maybe a little long for the tail, but it gives them plenty of time to get the idea. And they may notice that when we're doing this, we're doing waves. By putting that together, that can help with the motion of doing it on their own. And I always encourage to use the full space between the bottom line and the midline. And practicing the tail on the C is helpful because if they forget to practice the tail on the C, this is what happens. Yeah. And then they realize, oh, I can't tell. So practicing a tail to indicate a new letter is helpful in cursive. Once we learn the 2 o'clock, we can quickly add the A because it's a bottom line connector, and the D because they know that how to do tall letters. So those are easy ones to add without getting too confusing. And the G isn't too hard either. That's a good first loop one. I don't often add the O right away, but it's usually the first connector, top connector I do add because it's easier to join with some things, with other letters like L's and E's. Lastly, I add a couple of the first loop letters, N, or hump letters, N and M. So I help them practice humps. We practice doing them over and over. This is another very good warm up with the waves, with the loop, the L loops or the waves, and this one. As the students learning to use their space and to stop at the red line, these are good warm ups. They don't have to be writing anything. We show them that an N has one hump and then a full hump and a tail. M has one hump, then two full humps and a tail. You can quickly put this together with a word like net. Now we can spell a lot of words with the ones we know. For another vowel, U is not hard. So the student already at this point knows their vowels E, I, A,